CSIS 2440 is filmed before a live studio audience.
So the last thing we did the other day was we started incorporating the database with this thing. And now when you add a palindrome, it gets put into the database. So let's take a look at our database and see what's going on in there right now. And in the palindromes database, palindrome table, we got nothing right now. Oh, we have Madam, I Madam, just one. Okay. So if I go to add, say, 2 palindromes here, and I've got my magic book full of palindromes here. Oh, and I changed the CSS, so that's why this is wonky. Let me give it a hard refresh. And it's still weird. I'll have to deal with that later. Anyway, so in my palindrome book here, let's do a new one. Evasion, question mark. No, I save. That is a palindrome, believe it or not. And we'll do Madam, I Madam again, just to make sure that the duplicate checker is still working. And submit. Both of those are palindromes, and we look in our database, and it should have added the one, but not the other. So it did not add Madam again, but it did add the evasion one. Okay, that's where we left off the other day. So we talked about a couple of ideas that we can do with this in class and what we can do with the database. One of them was to, I think we mentioned counting how many times somebody tried to enter a palindrome. Did we bring that up in class? So we're bringing it up now. How's that? Yeah. All right. Also, we want to change it so that when you click on the checkbox here, that's going to use the database rather than the text file. And then we're also going to make a new page in our navigation, which will demonstrate how powerful our navigation system really is. And that new page is going to display whatever's in the database, right? And then we're going to do one other thing with the checkbox here, but we'll get to that. So how do we keep track of how many times somebody entered it? Like just a minute ago, I tried to enter Madam, I Madam. Well, I want to know how many times somebody tried to check that palindrome. So what can we do? Yeah, we'd have to modify the database, right? Add a field to it. So the way you do that in PHP MyAdmin, you click on structure. So make sure you're in the palindromes database, in the palindrome table, click on structure. And then right down here, it says add, see that? And then you can place where you want to add the column, one column, after phrase, after ID, beginning of the table. We'll just put it at the end. And we'll call it counter. Then over here on the far right, you just click save. And there you go, now we have counter. Now what's wrong with it already? Yeah, it's 0, right? So we're gonna fix it and make that go away. So I'm not gonna bother changing those to ones because we're gonna fix it in the code. Okay, where in our code should we increment that number? Yeah, it's right there on the screen, yeah, right here. But we got to change some things, right? This is a little trickier than you might think. Because the way we structured this, we're going to have to change this. So right now we have this function called add to the database. It's 30 lines long, right? It goes down to here. This is it. And we call this down below. If we find out it's a palindrome, somewhere down here in our is palindrome function at the bottom. If it's a function, we add it to the database, right? Which calls this function at the very top here. Okay. Well, what we're doing is we make a connection to the database, and then we just grab the values from the database and we stick them into this phrase array, right? If there's something in there, in other words, the database isn't empty, then we're going to loop through it. But what are we looping through? We're not actually looping through the database records. We're just looping through the list of the words taken out of the database, right? We're not even touching the database at this moment here. Okay, so the problem is when I find out I have a duplicate, I need to know the ID of that duplicate so I can update that record based on that ID. Does that make sense? So the way we have this structured right now, this isn't going to work. We're going to have to modify it. So the problem is this. This phrases array right here, what's in it? At the moment, if we were to run it, let me just go look in the database, it would just have those two things. So phrases is literally this. That's it. The phrases array is literally just what you see on line 8. Okay? Because we connected to the database, we dipped into the database here, and then we just returned that. The if down here is not looking in the database at all. This is not looking in the database. This is looking in this array right here. So we're saying if this phrases array has something in it, which it does at the moment, it would have these two things, then we're going to loop through that. We're doing a for each loop through those two things right there. We set this variable to false. If this particular word, so the first iteration is Madam, I'm Adam, if a stripped down clean version of that is equal to whatever word we passed in up here that we're comparing it to, if that is equal, then we set duplicate to true and we break out of it, and then we run or don't run this code down here, right? But because we're only looping through this phrases array, we have no access to information about its ID in the database. And so the problem is this. I could just say update the table where phrase equals Madam, I'm Adam. Set the counter equal to 1 or whatever, or 2, or increment it. But the spelling might be different, right? They might have capitalized it or not capitalized it, and the one I have stored in the database might have the punctuation or not have it. So you want to update it based on the ID. So we need the ID, right? So in this case, Madam, I'm Adam is ID number 15, right? So we somehow need to know that ID, so I can say update phrases, increment counter where ID is 15. Well, the problem is we don't know the ID, right? We need the ID, because in other words, we need to do this. If we find out we have a match, let's say we discover that Madam, I'm Adam is they're trying to enter that in. That's what was passed in here. And so duplicate ends up being true. Because duplicate's true, we need to say this in our query. Update palindrome set counter equal to counter plus 1 where ID equals 15. That's the ID of Madam, I'm Adam right here, right? But the problem is I do not know what that number is. Nowhere in here do I have access to that number. So we are going to probably need to write a function is what it comes down to. But the reason I'm spending so much time on this, I want to make sure that this problem is clear, that we understand what the problem here is. We need to generate this with our PHP, and this number will be different depending on which thing happened to be the duplicate. But we have no idea what that number is, right? So we need to get that number. So here's my thought on this. Right here, instead of all of this, I'm just going to ask the question, is duplicate, right? This function right here, its real job is to add stuff to the database. Okay, so that's what's happening down here. Well, why not replace this with another function that if it is a duplicate, it can return to me the ID, right? So let's just do this. New function here called function is duplicate. Duplicate, that's the French spelling there. Sorry about that. Okay, so function is duplicate. So we're going to pass in something here, so the phrase that we're going to check for duplicate, I'll just call it P as well, it's fine. And now we can connect to the database and go through a while loop and check for duplicates and everything. So we're going to need a connection here, right there. And before I forget, we're going to close our connection. So we close it, and in between, we'll do all the work. So we have a connection, and we need to just grab everything out of the database. Now, we have this right here, get pal database, but we don't want that, right? That grabs the phrases out of the database, but that's all it grabs. We want to grab the whole records. So we got to do a whole process here, right? So we need a query, which is just the one we always use, select star from palindrome, right? Pretty straightforward. And then we need to run that query and get the results. So you guys tell me. I want to make sure you remember how to do this. How do we do it? What's the function we're going to use? Give you a hint. It starts with MySQL. All of them do. Yep. Oh, nice. Okay, underscore. Good. Good job. Look on my autocomplete list there. Well, we're running a query. So how about query or quert? MySQL query, right? You were close. You had the underscore. Takes in two parameters, the connection and the actual query itself. Okay? And remember, this query here, when you run it, you may not be running a select. You might be running an insert or an update or a who knows what. Okay? If we're doing a select, then this will return whatever we selected. Right? It has a return value. If it's an insert or an update, it doesn't return any data, but it will return like a true or something like that, letting you know that the query ran and it worked, okay? So either way, we need to capture it though. We'll just go with results, because in this case, the results is going to be every record in the database, okay? Then we need to take those results and loop through them, right? That's where our while loop comes in. And what's the while? It's another function. Starts with MySQLi underscore. MySQLi underscore. And we need to fetch the query. Oh, come on. I just told you the name. Fetch array. So MySQL fetch array, it takes in 2 parameters, and they are? Results is one, very good. And the other one is actually, there's a hint on the screen, same hint that came up the other day. We want the MySQLi associative array, right? Okay, so that we're going to assign that to a variable, right? And we'll call it rows or row, something like that. So each iteration of the while loop, this returns a new record. And we just overwrite the value of row and assign the new record to row. And so at the moment, there's 2 things in the database, which are, you can see them down here in line 23. I should probably comment that out. And so the first iteration, the Madam record would get assigned to row. The second iteration, the evasion record gets assigned to row, right? So it's in this section where we need to do basically what we did right down here, right? So while we're looping through the database, we're going to see if it's a duplicate. If it is, then we're going to return a true, or we're actually going to return the value of the ID, right? So if the rows that we're looking at, the row that we're looking at, the phraseth element is equal to the thing that was passed in, then we have a match. It's a duplicate. So just return true, right? And we can just break out of everything. We don't have to worry about a break. We just return it and we're done. We don't want to return true though. We want to return the ideth element. So in the case of Madam I Madam, it would return 15. In the case of the evasion no I save, it would return number 16 right there. Okay? That's it. I mean, that's really all there is to it. We just want to make sure that we're doing the clean word version of these so that we compare, the stripped down, no punctuation version. Clean word. That's it. Otherwise, so if we make it past the while loop, that means there were no duplicates, so return false. Okay, so if we make it past the while loop, that means that we never returned out of here because we didn't find a duplicate. So once we get down here, we can return false. Okay? Now down here, we don't need any of this anymore. Okay? Because we're replacing it with this function up here. Okay. Well, let's see. What we're doing right now, we have this duplicate variable here. We could just do this. Duplicate equals is duplicate p, right? That alone is right where we left off. If I run it right now, theoretically, nothing should change. But we have better structure now, okay? So let's test my theory. Make sure we didn't break anything, because you never know. Let's start by using the default list, which is actually still the text file at the moment. So let's see what's in there. So Madam I Madam, Beavis, Redivider, Bob, and Madam. So this one should not get entered. And that one should not get entered, but these 3 should. The counter's not going to increment. We haven't built that code yet. But let's use that. And that's working the way we expected. Let's see if our database got updated. And it did. So everything's working just like it's always worked, but we spent the last half an hour changing code and not changing the functionality of the website. But now we have some nice structure that will make the next 3 things go by really quickly. Okay? All right. Now we can actually use this information to increment these counters. Okay? So let's go back to our code here. And right here, where'd it go? This duplicate thing. Look what we have right now. We have this insert statement that's going to insert into the palindrome. That's just a variable, right? And then we have if the duplicate thing is, if it's not a duplicate basically, then we're going to run the insert, okay? Well, first of all, we don't even need this anymore. You guys agree with that? Because it will always be set. On line 26, it will always be set. It'll either be false or it'll be some number. So we can clean that up a little bit. And we're just saying if it's not a duplicate, do this. We basically want an else here. Don't copy this because I'm going to change it. But we basically want an else that says update, right? You guys agree with that? So line 33 is saying if duplicate is false, meaning there's no duplicate, then go ahead and add the record, right? That's going to run line 30, which is being passed in right there. Otherwise, we want to update the counter, right? Yep, does that make sense? Okay, so we want to do an else statement here that's going to update the record, the counter, but there's actually a little bit more clever way we can do this, okay? So let's just look at how that would go. Let's start here. So let's say SQL is equal to update palindrome set counter equal to counter plus 1, where ID equals duplicate, right? Does everybody understand why I'm putting duplicate there? Because the duplicate is this value here, and it's whatever this function returned. Well, that function actually returns the ID of the thing that it's a duplicate of. So this will literally give me the line update palindrome set counter equal to counter plus 1, where ID equals 15 or 16 or whatever the number is. And then we have to do this again, right? You see that? And we can just put that in our else statement. Maybe we'll put some curly braces on it and we'll put it right there. And of course we have to call SQL instead of insert. Does everybody agree that that'll solve the problem? The question was right here, can I do counter plus plus or counter plus equals 1 or whatever? And you cannot do that in SQL. Right? Now I could take the value out of the database, use PHP to increment it and then put it back in, but this is a regular old SQL command that works just fine. Yeah, none of this right here is actually PHP, that's just SQL. So let's run it, make sure this actually works, okay? If it works properly, if I refresh this page right now, it'll rerun all of these palindromes here, and all of these should increment to 1. You agree with that? Because they're all in the database. Well, except for evasion, that one won't change, right? Okay, let's refresh it. Check it, no errors, that's a good sign. And they all went to 1. See it? So that's working, but there's a better way to do this.
There's got to be a better way.
Think about this. This insert statement here. What if we made this variable either have this value or have this value? And then we always run this. So in other words, something like this. The insert statement right here, let's say if not duplicate, right? If it's not a duplicate, then we're going to set SQL equal to that, right? If it's not a duplicate, nice duplicate, that's a super duplicate. All right, if it's not a duplicate, we're going to set SQL equal to this insert query. Otherwise, we're going to set SQL equal to this query. Follow? And then, no matter what, we just run this. Does that make sense? So we're always going to run this line no matter what. The difference is, what will that variable be? It will either be that or it will be that, based on whether or not it's a duplicate. That's cleaner code, right? That's the kind of thing you can find in a flowchart if you flowcharted this out, which we will not do for this assignment, obviously, or for this project. Okay, so here we are. We created the command right here, and then we're going to run the command right here, run the command here. We can get rid of this and get rid of this. So this is pretty clean code here, okay? There's one thing missing though. What happens on the very first insert, the brand new palindrome? What's its counter value going to be? It's going to be 0, yeah. So let's go home. We'll just choose to put 1 in. And we will do I did I? Or I did semicolon, did I? Okay, we'll put that one in there. And we'll notice when we refresh it, its counter value is 0. That's no good. Really easy fix for that though. Look at line 28. Yes, right now, this is saying insert into the palindrome table into the phrase field and put that in the phrase field. Well, I also want to put in the counter field the value 1, like so. So this query, this SQL on line 28, if it runs, it will generate this, or sorry, insert into palindrome, phrase, counter, values, madam, I'm Adam, or whatever they entered, comma 1. And I missed a parenthesis there. So that's what that will generate right there. That's what line 28 will generate. And again, this will be whatever they entered in. That's going to be added. Okay? So that will fix the problem there. So let's go back, put a new one in, consult my trusty book of palindromes again, and we'll go with won't it now. Refresh, and won't it now is in, and it's got a 1. Problem solved, right? So now every time we run this, it's going to just keep incrementing. If I refresh this page, that want it now, or won't it now, we'll go up to 2, hopefully. And it does. Looks good to me. So now we have some other issues, right? Let's empty this out, but you're going to find these other issues are going to fix themselves very easily. So I'm going to empty the database here. And of course, now if I use the default list, it's still using the text file, right? Let's change it to use the database, okay? I need to add some stuff back in there. I shouldn't have deleted that yet. I meant to show you something else first. So we just added stuff back in there, and it's working fine. Everything's a 1 now. Now, let's change it so that the default is the database, okay? It's going to take us 2 seconds. Down here, and get palindrome page content, right? We do this. We say either show the form that lets them enter the palindromes in, right? Which is this one right here. So either show that form right here on line 105 through 113, or if they did not check the default, or sorry, if they did check the default, I apologize, if they did check the default, then go get them things out of the text file, right? Otherwise, get the input from filling out this form. Everybody follow that? Okay, well this one line right here gets it out of the text file. All it is that function, if you'll recall, it reads a text file and it explodes it into an array. So line 117 is getting an array. Well, so is this function right here, get PalDB. That returns an array of what's in the database. That's it, we're done. That now is the default. Instead of getting it from the text file, it gets it from the database. Because remember, that right there, all that does is return that list of phrases, right? So that's still a good function, even though we couldn't use it a minute ago. We had to redo our code a little bit, okay? But now if we refresh this, we'll go home, click use the default, and all that should happen when I do this is those 4 things will just increment by 1, because that's what's in the database and we're just using that as the default. Submit, and those are the things that are in the database, and sure enough, they incremented by 1. That's it. I mean, one little line of code. Now, the power there, of course, is functions, right? If you write your functions well and you have them return values that are useful in more than one context, you can see how quickly we're able to change our code. One little line of code and bam, it works. So the question was, what if the database is empty? Yep, and they try to use that as the default. I'm pretty sure the code's already set up to handle that, the way we've structured it, but there may be 1 or 2 things we're going to run into, so let's clear it out. Okay, so now the database is empty. Come back here, go home, use default, and we should get that. The default page is empty, please enter a palindrome. That shouldn't say page, that should say database, right? But we made that the other day with the text file. That's happening right here. We grabbed the inputs here. Remember, just a minute ago, this was grabbing from the text file. If there's no inputs, which this will return false if the database is empty, we already built it to do that. If there's no inputs, then we used our friend recursion, right? to recall this function, repass in the search word, and pass in true for this reload parameter. And then if reload is true, and all this stuff here basically is saying, hey, this is when you're supposed to run this, right? When you're supposed to display the form. And in this particular event, also if reload's true, we're gonna add this little warning right here, right? And that should say the default database is empty. So that is working just fine, no problem. However, I want to disable that checkbox right there if the database is empty, okay? So let's take a look at the page that we would need to tweak to do that. This is the page, and it's one little simple thing because of our functions that are structured so well. We have this one little tweaky thing that we want to do. First of all, how do we disable a checkbox? Forget about PHP. How do you disable a checkbox? I'm offended because I know you guys took my 1430 class. Disabled, yes, very good. Yeah. So on line 10, if we just wanted to disable the checkbox, you literally put the keyword disabled somewhere in the tag, in the input tag, right? That line 10 is the checkbox. So if I refresh the page right now, notice when I refresh it, this is now disabled. Can't click it. That's it. Well, we just want to ternarily decide whether or not to display that. I know that is not a word. I made that up.
That's a made-up word.
We've already got some PHP right here using a ternary operator to decide if we want to put the word checked in it. Do the exact same thing for disabled, right? So let's get rid of that. And we can literally just copy and paste this whole thing right here. Just add an extra line at the end here. Shrink it a little bit. And instead of looking at that, we want to check to see if the database function returns false or not, right? So right there, that's our condition. If it's true, we do nothing, yeah? If it's false, we say disabled. That's it. Because that function was well written, now if I click home, it stays disabled because Mr. Database is empty. So now we do have that warning that will show up if they try to use the default, but they can't even use the default. So we got some double security there, right? So now they're gonna try to check that and they're like, hey, I can't do it. I guess I'll enter some palindromes and I'll search to see how many instances of the word cat are in there. And I will do stat cats and senile felines and none. Actually, we'll do liver. That's not a palindrome. Click submit. Stat cats and senile are true. Liver is not. There is one instance of cat on this site, and it's right there. And then this should now have some data. Stat cats and senile felines. Fabulous. Okay, it's all coming together, folks.
I love it when a plan comes together.
How are we feeling overall? So the question is, this default business, what's going on? By the way, notice that it's no longer grayed out because there's something in the database. What is that all about? The fact is, when we first decide to go publish this site the very first time with nothing in our database, the very first user that comes to it will have a grayed out checkbox and nobody else ever will, forever. Because every time a user adds a palindrome or 10 palindromes or whatever, that database just grows huge, and someday, 5 years from now, somebody's gonna check the default list and it's gonna check thousands of palindromes, right? Because they're all in the database. So this is mainly there just for the sake of learning, right? This is not a very practical, useful website. So the only thing that this site's useful for is that, well, for learning for sure, but also if we did publish it, I'd probably remove this search word thing, but it's fun to have a little site that can test if something's a palindrome, and I think it's really good at doing that, right? And you can enter, up to 10 palindromes. I think that's a lot. And if we just got rid of the search word thing for a real live version of it, then they can test out 10 palindromes and see, right? I thought I fixed this in my CSS so it would expand. Let me fix that real quick. Look in the CSS here. Oh, I know what's wrong. Right here, line 67. I actually knew that and I did that on purpose. Notice line 67. I'm glad this came up because I wanted to make sure you guys saw this. Line 67, I'm targeting in my CSS inputs with a type of text. We actually made a mistake when we built this thing. We never gave type text to the palindrome field. That blank, this field right here, those. The default is text, but we didn't explicitly say type equals text. So line 67 there is looking for something that's explicitly stated as text, and it can't find it, right? So that's easy to fix in our functions here. We get palindrome content right here, line 110. We just need to put type equals text there. That's what's generating that list there. So type equals text, right? And then when we refresh it, that should fill out to 100% like I wanted it to. There you go. I wanted it that wide because some of these palindromes in this book are really long, and I wanted you to be able to read them. So I'm glad that came up. But other than that, you know, this is not a bad system for if you want to check out a bunch of things and see if they're palindromes. And I'm pretty sure you could copy and paste a pretty long thing in there that you just found online. You didn't want to try to manually do it or whatever. So it's pretty good. Okay, so the last thing I want to do is I want to show you the default list. So you can have in our navigation here, default, and click on it and it shows you what's in the database, okay? So that's super easy because we made a really cool navigation system, right? So if I go here and I just pick one of these pages, we'll just go copy paste the history page and rename it to default and edit it and just change this to default list of palindromes. By magic, go home. Now that's in our navigation, right? And that's the default list of palindromes. Now we have to add the code that generates the palindromes there, but we have a function for that. That's super easy. So that'll just take a minute. But you see the power of our little navigation system we built, right? We just add that in there and it magically puts it in. Now there is one little thing I want to tweak with our navigation system. I'll show you that in a minute. But let's get this code working. All we need in here is a little bit of PHP. That's it. Now, there is one little issue. If the database is empty, right, we'll have a problem. But that aside, just refresh this page here. There you go. We can style it up, make it look pretty and all that if you want. But that's showing you what's in the database, okay? So we want to check to make sure that the database isn't empty, so that's easy enough. We can just do if pals, do all of this. We should probably put some curly braces there. That's going to be messy if we don't. Okay, so if pals, do that. Else, echo, use our warning class, and just say the database is empty. That's it. Here we go. Refresh. Everything's the way it should be, but then if we empty the database, delete, hello, delete. Yes. There you go. As soon as we add something to it, can't use the default, that's grayed out as we see. And let's look at some new ones that we haven't seen before. Oh man, this is a huge one. Are we, oh there it is, I've already written it in. Are we not drawn onward to new era? No, it is open one position and rotator. Those are all palindromes. If I go to default, I don't even have to look in the database anymore. I would just go to default. Poof, shows me what's in the database. Sweet. Now, let's breathe for a minute. There's one little thing I want to tweak with the navigation, then we're going to be done with this palindrome site forever. Okay? But there's something that can be gleaned here about databases. We have a silly database that has a silly purpose. But think about this. Imagine this was sort of maybe a database that has user information in it or customer information or whatever. You'd have to log in to get access to it. But once you're logged in, you click on, not default, but click on view customers, and you're just doing a query that shows you what's in the database, right? So you can have one tab for just seeing what's there, And then you have another tab, which would bring you to something like this to let you insert into the database. So rather than running a palindrome here, this is add new customer. And this would be put their first name, put their last name, put their phone number, click submit, and it adds a new customer to the database. This is essentially an admin tool for accessing a database. Right? So if you're using a database, again, you need to make sure that they log in and they have permission to do all this. But once that's done, you're in, and then you have the ability to update records if you wanted to, which we do when we try to duplicate a palindrome, right? So this is typically how these kind of things work. There's a page for updating, there's a page for adding, there's a page for deleting, there's a page for whatever, okay, for viewing. CRUD, right? There's a page for each level of CRUD. Okay, last thing here, this default business. I don't like that name. What I really wanted to call that file was this. Default, I was going to say list of palindromes. That's what I wanted to call it. Now, because our navigation is pretty awesome, magically it says list of palindromes or list from database something, but the point is it's got spaces in it, and that's not what I want the navigation to look like. Okay, so how can we fix that? So in our navigation, that's where all this magic happens, right? Let's go into includes and navigation. And this is we did this file weeks ago, right? It's a pretty intense file. And it's what made that appear there magically. So what can we do to make that a little bit better? Remember what's happening here? We get the page name that we're on, we scan the directory, and we create an array called file names that the very first element is index.php. And then as we scan through the directory right here, if the file has an extension of PHP, we add it to the directory. Unless it's index.php, we ignore it because we've already manually put that in there, right? So this just builds a file names array that has all of the PHP files in it, right? Then we loop through that and we display the navigation basically, and in the event that we're on the page that we're looking at in the navigation, we add this active class to it. And if it says index, we replace it with home, and you know, a few other things going on in here, right? This thing right here displays the palindrome navigation only if you're actually on the palindrome page. That's what's happening there. But it's designed so that if I just add something to that directory, poof, it's in the navigation. So what could I do to fix that space issue? Yeah, we could use the preg replace function, or we could just use the string replace function, which we used like on the first day of class when we were removing stuff. Do you remember that before we learned a regular expression? So let's just use that, right? And there's a lot of ways we can do it. We could probably just right here, just take whatever the file name is. And so we'll go file name is equal to string replace. And it takes in what you're searching for, what you're replacing it with, and what thing you're searching through. So I'm searching for a dash, I'm replacing it with a space, and I'm searching through file name, right? That should do it. Poof, right? The only other thing I might argue is that P should be capitalized, right? You could do that. Yeah, you could use UC first, except that's what we are using right here, and that's just giving us the capital L. How could I apply that to the P? We're going to do it because it's a fun exercise in string manipulation, okay? It's, at this point, maybe we could argue that this is a little bit of overkill, but we can use our friendly function called explode, and we can explode list of palindromes into 3 separate words, and then apply UC first on that, and then implode it back to a string. That make sense? Okay. All right, so let's comment this out for just a moment. So let's just say exploded name is equal to explode, and we want to explode the file name, and we want, we want the delimiter first, I apologize. And the delimiter in this case is going to be the hyphen, like so. That's going to give us an array called exploded name, explode name, exploded name. That should just be an array that has 3 elements in it, right? In the case of the list of palindromes, okay? And then we can do a for each through the exploded name. Follow? So we'll do a for each through the exploded name as F name or whatever, something short. And then we want to apply UCK uppercase to that. However, if I apply it to that, I mean, this variable just disappears after the for each loop's over. So what I really want to do is, well, I just want to build another string or stick it in another array, but somehow we have to keep track of the separate words. Does that make sense? So I would probably vote for using another array, okay? So we'll just say X name is equal, actually X name square brackets equals first name. And that UC, not first name, but file name, UC first. So now we've uppercased list, iterate, of, iterate, palindrome, right? For this one right here, list of palindromes. We also, coincidentally, just uppercase home, about, contact, and history as well, right? It just exploded into a 1-element array right here. Because remember, this is a loop that's going through everything in the navigation. Okay, but now I have this as an array. Well, if I implode it to a space-separated string, follow? So if I just take that xn, we want to assign that string to file name, right? Because file name is what's happening all down here. So we're going to reassign the value of file name to be implode, and we want to implode on a space, and that is the array that we want to implode. Did everybody follow that? Implode takes an array and turns it into a string, right? So implode will take an array that has at the moment there's an array here called xn, which has list, of, and palindrome. Yeah, we're unexploding it, exactly right. We're imploding it, right? The opposite of explode, yeah. So that should give us, I mean, all that work to get a capital P right there. It also gives a capital O, but that should be enough. Ooh, awesome. Everything worked, we just did it in the wrong spot. So I think if we put all that crap right there, right here, because this is the part that's actually uppercasing it right now. Yeah? So if I just do this, do all that exploding business that we just did, and exploding and imploding inside the else statement, clean this up. Okay, if I do that, then we'll be back to this file name here. And then notice what we were doing before. None of this existed a moment ago. Line 28 was it was just uppercasing this, right? So we already have it uppercased right here, file name. So we don't need to bother with this part of it anymore. The uppercase, that's already done. We just need to make sure we extract the PHP out of there, which is what's happening right there, and that should do it, right? So before we were just doing that, and then uppercasing the first letter. Now we're doing all of this. I think that'll solve the problem. Let's just see. Yeah, something is funny here. Look at this though. That's one thing about contact. It's adding it each time. Yes, 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 yes. Okay. Oh yeah, no, what's happening, this variable right here is just building. It's not resetting. Follow? We need to reset that variable every time. Yeah. So we just need to set this to an empty array each time we go through this. So xn equals that. That should reset the array every time. Because what's happening here, notice we have just about, then we have about contact, then we got about contact history, then we got about contact history, list of palindromes. Right, just growing, so we need to reset it with every else statement. That's why. I think that should fix that. There we go. The only thing that's fishy here, look at this. Palindrome showed up. You know why? Because we capitalized it. Because right now it's looking for lowercase palindrome, right? And by the time it gets there now, it's capitalized. So we'll just change, we'll compare the lowercase of this to that and the lowercase of this to that. And let's see what happens there. So string to lower. So we lowercase whatever file name is, which at the moment will be a capital palindrome, just as a comparison. We're not changing its case, we're just comparing it at a lowercase level. See if that solves that issue. And refresh. There you go. You ever follow that problem there? What was happening? Okay. And remember, this doesn't actually change it to lowercase. It just lowercases it for the moment, just to compare it, right? Yeah, exactly right. Okay. Last thing we're going to do here. So we got our navigation's better. Now, we could, for fun, figure out how to make that O from of lowercase, because in a title that should be lowercase, but I'll leave that as a challenge for you. Okay, functions. Now this functions file is getting kind of crazy, but check out this function right here from line 53 down to 90. Guess what? Append to text file, deleted, don't need it. Get the Palindromes text file. Don't need it. Looks good. This is a pretty solid program overall, especially since we Frankensteined it together over time. Okay, let's just go do one final test to make sure we didn't break anything. So let's see what's in the database. We got 3 things in the database. So let's start by using the default list. And that looks like it grabbed from the database, and it should have incremented everything to 2. Looks good. Let's go ahead and try to add some duplicates. So 3, and we have what? We'll do rotator, rotator. Let's add some new ones here. So we got on add a no, and then we got a total lot. That's only 4 letters. Submit. All of them are palindromes, and refresh. Rotator should increase by 1. And rotator did increase by 1, and the other ones got added in there. Last thing to test here, check it all, delete it, and make sure the default doesn't show up, and it does not. So we can add 3 more palindromes here. And let's do word row. And let's do test set and Beavis. All right, Beavis is false. We knew this. Looks good to me. Oh yes, and check the page to make sure the palindromes showed up. Oh, and it doesn't because, oh, I'm glad you said that. Yeah, because look what it did up here. It added the spaces and everything in there. Yeah, so we changed that when we did. That's good catch, man. Nice. We got 3 minutes. We'll fix it. Let's look at this real quick. That's all happening right here. So where's that going on? Yeah, it's file name, actually href right here, file name. There we go. Okay. So the file name is what's happening here. So easy. We'll leave file name alone, and we'll go with display name right here. And we'll put display name here, and that should fix everything. Okay, and list of palindromes. There we go. So again, what was happening there? We were changing file name here, and file name was getting the space treatment and the uppercase treatment, and that was trying to be placed right here in the href. So we decided to stop manipulating file name and make a whole new variable called display name. That's the one we manipulated here and added to the display, and then we kept file name here to go into the href. Okay, questions?